I'm just reading from this book, My Exodus from Roman Catholicism by Paul De Ballester. It's basically a former Roman Catholic who converted to Eastern Orthodoxy after a lot of doubts about certain teachings and things like that, especially about the popes, and wanted to read a few pages from it. I like it. I recommend it. I was reading on this part, talking about the infallibility, he says, really, how could I possibly accept the infallibility of the popes who usurp a title promoting themselves as the exclusive hearers of the Apostle Peter, who more than the rest of the apostles was told by the Lord on several occasions that he, Peter, did not know what he was saying? What was the infallibility of Peter when he was reprimanded by Apostle Paul for being clearly in the wrong, because he walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel? Are those who call themselves his official successors to the papal throne and to the bishopric of Rome infallible? In fact, they knew very well that they harbored quite a few scandalous names in their lineage. He talks about such as that of Pope Marcellus, and he talks about different popes and stuff. And this is a notorious apostate and idolater who, as everyone knows, sacrificed in the temple of Aphrodite and in front of her altar. And it talks about Pope Marcellus 296-303 fell into the sin of adultery and reached the point of sacrificing to the gods of the Gentiles to save his life and his property during the persecution of Diocletian. It is a well-known historical fact that Marcellus entered the temple of Aphrodite and offered sacrifices to the goddess on her very altar. This scandalous event, which became widely known at the time, caused the Christianity of Rome to keep for many generations the worst memory of this pope, at least until the end of the 5th century, according to the historical accounts that have reached our days. The Roman Catholic historians, unable to deny the reality of these sad events, prefer to blame these on the imagination of the heretical Donatist enemies of Marcellus, who supposedly organized a defamation campaign against him after his death. At the same time, however, they are equally unable to explain to us why, if that were the case, Pope Marcellus was expressly noted as an apostate in the Roman Liber Pontificalis itself. Moreover, this was precisely the opinion of the Roman hierarchy that refused to include the name of its apostate leader in the official calendar where the time periods of the papal hierarchies are recorded. And indeed, from Fabius 250 until Marcus 395, all the names of the Roman bishops are found, with the exception of that of Marcellus. And he continues, as with Pope Julius Infallible, he who was excommunicated as a heretic by the Synod of Sardis was Liberius Infallible, he who was a follower of the delusions of Arius and who condemned Athanasius, the great champion of orthodoxy, was Felix II Infallible, he who, according to Saint Athanasius, was elected pope by 3 eunuchs and ordained by 3 spies of the emperor. Such a man was a worthy candidate of his body of electors, given his well-known heretical beliefs and his overall conduct befitting an antichrist. And he talks about down here, says it is generally known that the Synod of Sardis 342 through 343, the Eastern bishops under the leadership of Patriarch Stephen of Antioch excommunicated Julius, the Bishop of Rome. This took place after a Western delegation demanded the revision of certain aphorisms and the celestial dispositions of the East. And then concerning the heresy of Liberius, 352 to 366, we have 3 indisputable witnesses: Saint Jerome, Saint Hilary, and Saint Peter the Damian. Initially, the Orthodox Liberius was barred from Rome and exiled by the Arians. A short while later, however, weary and distraught by the hardships of exile and nostalgic for the glorious, luxurious life of the Papal See, he betrayed the faithful and apostatized and signed the heretical Arian Creed. After this, he condemned and anathematized Saint Athanasius as a heretic. Overjoyed by these events, the heretical Arians welcomed him back to Rome and enthroned him once again. St. Jerome expressly records Liberius, weary from the hardships of exile, signed the heretical delusion and returned to Rome as conqueror. That's in Chronicles 83:57 and the script Ecclesiastes. And this is also confirmed by St. Hilary, who laments seeing the papal signature under the heretical creed and exclaims, I'm sorry if I pronounce this, Haec est perfidia Ariana. In the fragment of histories in the 8th or 7th, St. Peter the Damian during the 11th century affirms once again that Pope Liberius was a heretic and an apostate. Okay, and then St. Athanasius against Arians. St. Athanasius also comments that Pope Felix was so scandalously heretical that the faithful of Rome refused to enter the churches he was visiting. That's in the Epistle of the Monastics, and also then he talked about Pope Honorius, right? And then he talked about, was Honorius infallible? He was subscribed to the heresy of monothelitism. And then it talks about Pope Honorius 625 accepted and publicly ratified the heretical teachings of the monothelites. Persisting in such a blatant delusion against the faith, he was unanimously condemned and anathematized by the Sixth Ecumenical Synod, together with all the other leaders of the monothelite heresy, to Theodore Paranites, the heretic, anathema to Sergius, the heretic, anathema, and to Honorius, the heretic, anathema, and to Cyrus, the heretic, anathema, to Pyrrhus, the heretic, anathema. Okay, and these are indisputable truths, especially since they are confirmed in the pastoral epistles of the very popes who succeeded Honorius, right? Thus, Leo II, in his apostolic epistle sent to the bishops of Spain asking for their consent on the teachings of the Sixth Ecumenical Synod, states that Honorius and his followers were punished with eternal condemnation. Okay, and because the Synod found them to be in betrayal of the purity of the apostolic tradition, he also wrote to King Ervigius that Honorius was condemned by the Venerable Synod and was excluded from the communion of the Catholic Church. Likewise, Pope Arian II, in a synodal epistle of the Roman Synod, refers to the heretical guilt and anathema of Honorius by the Synod. And then says the Roman Catholic historians, unable to refute these undeniable facts, have been ordered to keep absolute silence about them, or in the event that it is absolutely necessary, simply to refer to them in passing. Thus, for example, in the Somides Concilies of Abiguit, not the slightest reference to the condemnation of Honorius can be found in the minutes of the 8th session of the Sixth Ecumenical Synod. All these events were duly included in the festal service book Breviarium Romanum, in celebration of St. Leo, who was honored in the West. And then it says, on June 28th, up until the day the Vatican authorities educated the text to be so offensive that it ordered its extinction. This alteration took place when Pope Clement VIII revised the Breviarium. Okay, and then talking about he's talking about all this about the so-called the infallible popes making these kinds of mistakes, and a bunch of controversies surrounding all these people claiming to be infallible and things like that. And then the other saying was Sixtus V infallible. He who circulated an edition of the Holy Scripture which he corrected by himself, this is quote unquote corrected, by himself based on the authority and the fullness of his apostolic power. This edition was so distorted by all kinds of delusions, and that it was soon withdrawn because it was such a great scandal. Okay, it was Urbanus infallible? Was Urbanus infallible? He who condemned the theory of Galileo that that the earth revolves around the sun. Okay, and then I think Galileo talked about Galileo. Yeah, actually, let's see. It definitely talks about a lot of interesting, history on the popes. Just me, I barely studied some history. I picked up a lot of history on Orthodoxy and things like that. And I definitely like this book because it's a small little short book to kind of gives you a lot of information about, these controversies surrounding the popes and things like that. And it talks about how, that the way Paul says that it's the church that's the pillar and ground of truth, right? And it doesn't speak of Peter, right? Because the whole point is that it's Peter, the first infallible pope. When in reality, it's talking about how, when Paul states, right, like the church is the pillar and ground for all truth, right? And it's guided by the Spirit of God, and so it's not just a Bible or a pope, right? So it's not really the pope or the Bible. It's just the church itself, and that's why I say Orthodoxy has the best stance as far as that goes. Let me see. And I'll just end it at Saint Cyprian. Let me see. Saint Cyprian says that it is the Church and not the Bishop of Rome who constitutes the pure and life-giving water that cannot be blurred or alterated, because the spring from which it flows is in itself pure and crystal. Our Lord Jesus Christ promises permanent support until the end of the age to the entire Church, and not exclusively to the popes, for the benefit of the entire Church, and not only for that of Peter and his successors. He promised to ask from his Father, the Spirit of truth, the very Spirit that teaches all the truth, and all that the Lord taught. It's precisely for this reason that the Apostle Paul calls the Church, and not Peter, the pillar and ground of truth. Likewise, St. Irenaeus teaches that we must seek the truth of Christ in the Church and nowhere else, because within her bosom we find it pure, complete, unadulterated, with the utmost certainty. And the Lord addressed not only Simon Peter, but all his apostles and disciples, saying, "He who hears you hears me." Besides, throughout the entire history of the ancient Church, from its inception until the Great Schism, there is not a single precedent either of any great disagreement or momentous matter of faith that has been resolved by the bishops of Rome. In my view, this is quite inexplicable if we were to suppose that the popes were indeed recognized as the true, absolute, and above all infallible leaders of the ecumenical Church. And it says, "It's the common knowledge that not a single one of the great heresies was defeated by a pope, but rather by a synod, or through a church father or saintly theologian. Arianism, for example, was condemned by the Synod of Nicaea, and not by the Pope, who himself was infected by this heresy. The Synod of Ephesus condemned Nestorianism. Saint Avianius confounded the Gnostics. The Blessed Augustine refuted the Cacodoxies of Pelagianism, and so on. Furthermore, the bishops of Rome never served as arbiters in any of these great celestial matters. On the contrary, they were often the ones indicted and prosecuted on matters of faith by other bishops, patriarchs, and synods. In this manner, the Synod of Arilat resolved the contention between the Bishop of Rome and the bishops of Africa regarding the manner of rebaptism, Similarly, it was the African Church that wrote a strong admonition to the bishops of Rome and Alexandria, warning them to put an end to enmity and seek peace. The Patriarch of Alexandria, in unison with the Eastern bishops, excommunicated Pope Julius at the Synod of Sardis. And then it says Pope Honorius was condemned and anatomized by the Sixth Ecumenical Synod, and so on. Okay, so I think I'll just stop it there, but yeah, it is a pretty good book, My Exodus from Roman Catholicism. This man's a martyr. Yeah, he's recognized as a martyr. I think he was martyred in Mexico, I think it was. Yeah, but overall, I recommend this book. And if you like my video, please like and subscribe. Thank you.